50 minutes into Canada's World Cup match against Qatar in Vancouver, a member of the Canadian coaching staff turned to the referee and said 5 words that tell you everything you need to know about what had just happened. His legs hanging off. That's not commentary hyperbole. That's not a panicked exaggeration in the heat of the moment. That's what a professional, experienced member of a national team's coaching staff said in real time, looking at what had just happened to Ismail Kone's left leg. Jesse Marsh, Canada's head coach, would later describe the sound itself. "You could hear the bones snap," he said. "Right in front of the bench, we could all hear it." Canada went on to win this match 6-0. Jonathan David scored a hat-trick, Cyle Larin opened the scoring, Nathan Saliba added a stunning free kick. By any normal measure, this was a statement performance, a Canadian side announcing themselves as genuine contenders, putting themselves on the brink of qualifying for the knockout stages from their own World Cup, on home soil in front of their own fans at BC Place. Nobody is talking about the scoreline this morning. They're talking about Kone, about the tackle that put him there, about the red cards, about the players and coaches who clashed on the pitch with a kind of raw emotion that World Cup football rarely produces outside of a final, and about what happened 14 minutes later when one of Kone's teammates ran to the touchline, grabbed his jersey, and held it up to a crowd that was already on its feet. Let's go through exactly what happened, because this is one of those matches where the story isn't really about football tactics at all. It's about something that happened to one specific human being and how everyone around him responded. First, a little bit about who Ismail Kone actually is, because to understand why this moment hit Canadian football as hard as it did, you have to understand the journey that brought him to that pitch in Vancouver. Kone is 23 years old. He came up through CF Montreal, the same club that gave Canadian football some of its most important young talents over the last decade. The club's own president, Gabriel Gervais, has talked about how stunned the organization was by how quickly Kone developed, not just his potential, which was obvious early, but the speed at which he turned that potential into genuine first-team quality. There was interest from clubs in England during his rise, including a move to Sheffield United that ultimately fell through. He chose, at that point, to stay and finish his progress in Montreal rather than force a transfer. Since then, his path has taken him through Watford, Marseille, and Rennes in Europe, a period that, by his own admission and by the assessment of people around the Canadian program, was inconsistent. Promising flashes, but not the sustained run of form that fully establishes a player at the international level. This season at Sassuolo in Italy's Serie A, something clicked. He scored a deft chipped goal against AC Milan earlier this year, set up another, and has been enjoying what people close to the national team describe as the most consistent stretch of his career, just as the World Cup arrived. There's also history between Kone and Marsh that matters here, because it shows you the kind of relationship this injury actually disrupted. Last September, during a friendly against Romania, Kone was substituted off while Canada were leading and reacted with visible, public frustration, storming to the bench, returning toward Marsh for more, only held back by a reserve goalkeeper. It was the kind of moment that could have created lasting tension between a passionate young player and his head coach. Instead, both parties said afterward they'd moved past it quickly. Kone talked about how much he cared about the jersey, about the team, about what wearing that uniform actually meant to him. That context, a player who has shown publicly and emotionally exactly how much this team means to him, is part of why what happened in Vancouver landed the way it did, not just for the fans, but for the people inside that locker room. Now, to the match itself. Canada were already dominant before the 50th minute arrived, 3-0 at halftime. Jonathan David with 2 goals, Cyle Larin with the opener. Qatar were already down to 10 men. Homam Al-Amin sent off for a last-man challenge on Tajon Buchanan. This was by every measure up to that point a comprehensive victory, taking shape exactly as the form table suggested it might. And then Qatar's Asim Madibo came in on Kone from behind.
Kone had just passed the ball to a teammate. The challenge arrived late, well after the ball was gone, catching him from behind in a way that left no room for him to brace or protect himself. The reaction around him told the story before any replay was needed. Modibo himself was seen with his hands on his head almost instantly, the universal gesture of someone who knows the moment contact is made that something has gone badly wrong. Players on the pitch immediately began waving toward the sideline for medical help before even surrounding Kone themselves. Canadian players rushed toward their teammate. Medical staff followed. Canadian team doctors placed an air cast around the injured leg almost immediately, a standard emergency measure to stabilize a fracture before any further movement. And as Kone lay on the turf being treated, players from both sides began to clash with each other, emotions completely overtaking the normal professional composure that usually holds during a stoppage like this. A brawl, in the words of multiple match reports, breaking out between benches as tempers flared around the stretcher.
VAR reviewed the incident. Modibo was shown a straight red card for serious foul play. Qatar, already down to 10 men from the first half sending off, were reduced to 9. It has since been confirmed that Kone suffered a suspected fractured tibia and fibula, the two bones of the lower leg, and was rushed to hospital for emergency surgery to stabilize the injury. His own teammates were visibly distressed watching the medical staff work on him before he was moved. Stefan Eustachio, one of Kone's midfield partners, spoke for the dressing room afterward. "We're going to miss him," he said. "He has that X factor that our team really needs." As Kone was finally stabilized and wheeled away from BC Place on a gurney, the crowd rose to their feet. A standing ovation for a player being taken to hospital in the middle of his own team's World Cup match, with fans reportedly chanting his name as he was carried off. Kone, from the gurney, gave the fans a thumbs up in return, waving as he disappeared down the tunnel. Marsh confirmed afterward that he hadn't yet spoken directly to his own player at the time of the post-match press conference because Kone was still at the hospital. His mother and family were there with him. Marsh said he planned to go see him personally as soon as the press conference ended. Kone would need surgery. The exact extent of the procedure and his recovery timeline had not yet been determined. 14 minutes after Kone left the pitch, Nathan Saliba struck a free kick that found the inside of the post and went in off the goalkeeper's arm. As he wheeled away to celebrate, Saliba formed the number 8 with his two hands, Kone's squad number. Then he ran to the touchline, picked up Kone's jersey, and held it up for the crowd to see. The ovation that followed was, by every account from those in the stadium, even louder than the one that had greeted the goal itself. That's the kind of moment that doesn't get scripted. Nobody plans a tribute like that in the middle of a World Cup match. It happens because a group of teammates genuinely cares about the person who was just carried off the pitch, and they wanted him, wherever he was, to know it. Now here's where the story gets complicated and where the post-match fallout became its own separate controversy. At full time, with Canada having added further goals to make it 6-0, there was a clear altercation on the pitch between the Canada and Qatar benches. Marsh and Qatar head coach Yulin Lopetegui were involved in a heated touchline exchange, and the tension spilled into a wider confrontation between both coaching staffs and players. Neither manager wanted to discuss the specifics afterward. Marsh's only comment on it was blunt: "I'm not spending 1 second discussing that." What he was willing to discuss, at length, was his confusion at Qatar's reaction to the original red card decision. Marsh confirmed that Modibo had actually entered the Canadian dressing room after being sent off, specifically to apologize to Kone in person. According to Marsh, Kone told his own teammates that the apology had happened, and Marsh said he didn't believe Modibo intended such a serious outcome from the challenge. But that personal apology from player to player apparently didn't reflect how the rest of the Qatari bench responded in the moment. Marsh was direct about his frustration. He said he didn't understand the reaction from Qatar's entire bench, trying to argue the sending off shouldn't have happened, when what had occurred was, in his words, a clear foul that broke a player's leg. That's the tension sitting underneath this whole story. One player, in a moment of clarity once he understood what he'd done, walked into the opposing team's dressing room to apologize directly, but the wider reaction from his own bench, in the heat of the match, was to contest the decision rather than accept what had happened.
Two very different responses to the same incident coming from the same team within the same hour.
Let's talk about what this means for Canada going forward, because there's a football story buried underneath all of this emotion that deserves attention too. Canada are now on the brink of qualifying for the knockout stages from their own World Cup. A 6-0 win with a Jonathan David hat trick puts them in a commanding position in Group B heading into their final group game against Switzerland. This is exactly the tournament that Canadian football has been building toward for years. Alphonso Davies back from a long-term ACL injury after 262 days on the sidelines. Jonathan David hitting career-best form, a home tournament that millions of Canadians have waited their entire lives to see their country host. And now they have to do the rest of it without one of their most important midfielders. Kone at Sassuolo this season had been one of Canada's standout performers in the build-up to this tournament, and according to Marsh, he'd been an amazing player in the team's opening 2 World Cup games specifically, a creative, dynamic presence in midfield that Marsh had built real tactical trust around. Losing him to a broken leg requiring surgery in the group stage of his country's home World Cup is the kind of loss that doesn't show up in a scoreline, but absolutely shapes what comes next for this team, both for the remainder of this group campaign and for whatever Canada managed to do in the knockout rounds beyond it. Marsh said his side was left shaken by what happened to their teammate, drawing a direct comparison to when fellow Canadian international Tajon Buchanan suffered a serious injury in training back in 2024. That word, shaken, is doing a lot of work in Marsh's comments. This wasn't just a tactical setback. It was watching a friend and colleague carried off on a stretcher in the middle of what should have been one of the proudest nights of his career, in front of his own country's fans, with his family rushing to a hospital they hadn't expected to be at that evening. And yet, by Marsh's own account, the dressing room found a way to refocus and finish the job, because that's what they believed Kone himself would have wanted. "There's a lot of thoughts that go through our heads right now," he said. "We're all thinking about him, but we're all very proud of what we are." That sentiment, proud of who we are, even in the middle of genuine heartbreak, seems to capture something specific about this Canadian squad's identity heading into the rest of this tournament. Here's the bigger picture worth sitting with. World Cup football produces moments like Saliba's tribute goal precisely because of what's at stake emotionally for everyone involved, not just the result, but the people wearing the jersey, the years of preparation, the connection between teammates that becomes visible in exactly these kinds of moments. The standing ovation for an injured player being wheeled off the pitch is a reminder that underneath every result and every statistic, this is fundamentally a human game played by people who care deeply about each other and about what they're representing. And the touchline confrontation between Marsh and Lopetegui and between both benches is a reminder that those same human stakes can boil over into something much messier when emotions run that high. Nobody walked away from that exchange looking entirely composed, and neither manager seemed eager to revisit it afterward. What happens next is genuinely uncertain. Kone's recovery timeline from a fractured tibia and fibula requiring surgery typically rules a player out for several months at minimum, which almost certainly means this World Cup is over for him before the knockout stages even begin, a brutal outcome for a player who had finally found, in his own words and in the words of those around him, the most consistent form of his career at precisely the moment it mattered most. Canada, meanwhile, move on with a squad that has shown both extraordinary quality on the pitch and remarkable solidarity off it, heading into their final group match against Switzerland that could confirm their place in the knockout rounds for the first time in the tournament's modern era. What do you make of Modibo's personal apology compared to how the rest of Qatar's bench reacted in the moment? And do you think Saliba's tribute goal, running straight to grab Kone's jersey in the middle of a World Cup match, is one of the moments people will remember from this tournament long after the scorelines themselves are forgotten? I'd genuinely like to know what you think. Does a moment like this change how you watch the rest of this team's tournament, knowing what they're carrying with them into every remaining match? Leave it in the comments below. If you found this worth your time, a like helps more than you'd think. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of football conversation, every match, every story behind the scoreline, all the way through to the final. And I'll see you in the next one. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. Sometimes it's a reminder of exactly how much these players care about each other when it matters most.